The date was December 19th, 2025. The time? 4 a.m. in Brussels. The European Council headquarters was eerily quiet, except for the tension, which was almost visible, thick enough to choke you. For 19 hours straight, the most powerful leaders in Europe had been locked in a single room, arguing, negotiating, pleading, and threatening all over one question: how to fund Ukraine's defense using frozen Russian assets. For months, the headlines had promised it. The European Union was poised to seize $105 billion in frozen Russian funds. It sounded almost too good to be true Moscow's money, redirected to punish the aggressor and support the defense of a sovereign nation. A true act of justice, or so it seemed. But when the doors finally opened, the exhausted leaders stepped into the glaring lights of the cameras. And the story had changed. The seizure was off. The plan was dead. Instead, the EU would borrow $90 billion itself, placing the burden squarely on European taxpayers. Why? Why walk away from $105 billion in free money? Why tax your own citizens instead of funding Ukraine with Russian money? The media told you it was about technicalities, about unity, about politics. They lied. The truth, the real truth, is darker, more complex, and more dangerous than anything you've read in the headlines. It starts with a lawsuit, a massive one filed in Moscow, demanding 18 trillion rubles. That's roughly $229 billion. Then there's a company you've probably never heard of, Euroclear. And finally, a secret warning from the European Central Bank, claiming that seizing these assets could potentially destroy the euro itself. Let's step back. Since February 2022, the G7 nations have immobilized roughly $260 billion of Russian central bank assets. But here's the catch. Most of this money I send to sitting in a vault in Washington or London. $191 billion of it is in Belgium, in the accounts of a single company, Euroclear. Now, if you're thinking, Euroclear? What's that? Let me explain. Think of Euroclear as the plumber of the global financial system. When you buy a German bond or a French stock, Euroclear moves the ownership from seller to buyer. It handles $37 trillion in assets across 90 countries. The company is the beating heart of European capital markets. If it stops working, Europe doesn't just stumble, it could collapse. Here's the kicker. The Russian assets in Euroclear aren't ordinary. They're matured bonds. Normally, when a bond matures, it pays out cash. But because of sanctions, Euroclear cannot send the cash back to Moscow. So the money sits in their accounts, growing with interest. By late 2025, the interest alone had ballooned into billions of dollars. The European Commission saw this as an opportunity, almost a loophole. Why not use this cash to fund Ukraine? They thought. It was a windfall, a free gift, a risk-free asset. Or so they believed. But in finance, there's no such thing as a risk-free asset. And by touching that money, Europe was about to touch the third rail of global finance. While Brussels drafted legislation, Moscow was preparing a counterattack. On December 12, 2025, 1 week before the summit, the Russian Central Bank filed a lawsuit in a Moscow arbitration court. Their claim? $229 billion, arguing that Europe was holding their money unlawfully. A Russian court may not have authority in Belgium, but Euroclear isn't confined to Belgium. It holds assets worldwide, including billions in Russian accounts tied to Western banks. The Kremlin's message was clear and chilling. Seize our $105 billion, and we will bankrupt Euroclear by seizing $229 billion of Western assets in Moscow. This is called symmetrical retaliation. And for Belgium, where Euroclear is headquartered, it was existential. If Euroclear failed, it could trigger a chain reaction across the entire Eurozone. Banks would default, markets would panic, economies would shudder. Belgium's Prime Minister Bart de Wever understood the stakes. He realized that if his country went along with the seizure, it would be Belgium alone paying the price. Other EU countries could enjoy the political glory, but Belgium would carry the financial and legal weight. He demanded an indemnity mechanism, a legal contract ensuring all EU nations shared the liability. But when it came time to sign, hesitation froze the room. No other leader wanted to commit. Politicians liked the idea of seizing Russian money until the personal risk became real. Then came another blow, the ECB warning. Christine Lagarde sent a confidential note to Brussels. Her message was blunt. Seizing these assets could trigger a massive capital flight, destabilizing the euro. Countries around the world might dump euros in favor of gold or yuan. Borrowing costs would rise. Inflation would spike. The euro itself could collapse. Funding Ukraine, as urgent as it was, suddenly collided with Europe's financial survival. The ECB's stance made the plan effectively impossible. No bailout. No safety net. Just risk. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, weighed in. Italian banks still had exposure in Russia. If Russia retaliated, Italian shareholders would take the hit. National interest, she argued, must come first, a philosophy now dubbed the Meloni Doctrine. And so, the political consensus crumbled. Even geopolitics added pressure. The incoming Trump administration in the United States sent subtle warnings. Unlike the Biden era, the new team viewed the frozen assets not as a piggy bank, but as leverage for negotiations. Spend the money, and Russia loses incentive to negotiate. Freeze it, and you maintain leverage for a possible peace deal. And finally, the legal minefield, a 1989 bilateral investment treaty between Belgium and the USSR. Expropriation without compensation? Forbiddance. If Belgium allowed the EU to touch the assets, Russia could sue in international courts and win. Belgian ships, planes, even diplomatic accounts could be seized globally. By 4 a.m., December 19th, reality was undeniable. The $105 billion seizure was too dangerous, too risky, and legally impossible. So the EU pivoted. Option B. Borrow $90 billion from the markets. Let European taxpayers bear the interest and risk. Touch Russia's money? Never. The assets stayed frozen indefinitely, a symbolic hostage, a warning, but untouchable. The lesson? Finance controls politics. Structural integrity of banks, sovereign immunity, and fear of market collapse overruled moral desire. Russia had successfully deterred the West without firing a single shot. Euroclear survived. The euro stayed stable. But for European taxpayers, the cost had arrived in the form of debt, and the illusion that Russia would pay shattered. And this is the financial coin historian. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe, and hit the bell. We dig into the real forces shaping the world forces politicians don't want you to see. The next revelation will shock you even more. Don't miss it.